think we can go ahead and call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Carlson?
Here.
Priscillis?
Here.
Parker?
Here.
Pretorius?
Here.
Russo?
Here.
The Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial body created by the City of Iowa City according to state statutes. The board's purpose is to decide on applications for variances from the zoning ordinance, appeals of decisions of city officials, and applications for special exceptions requested under the zoning ordinance. The Board of Adjustment is an independent volunteer board made up of Iowa City residents and is not part of the city administration. We are assisted in our work by the city attorney's office and by planning staff. Prior to this meeting, board members received the materials submitted by the applicants, the staff reports, reviewing the application, and any correspondence submitted by members of the public. Board members have not discussed the application or its merits with each other, staff, the applicant, or any other member of the public in advance of this meeting. All consideration and discussion by the board takes place in open meeting here tonight, where we also have an opportunity to hear from the public. The board bases its decision on facts and evidence allowed by city code presented in open meeting. Concise and truthful testimony helps us a great deal in our decision-making. We ask that if you wish to speak, that you come to the podium, print your name and address on the sign-in sheet, and speak clearly into the microphone so your testimony can be heard by all present and by our minute taker, as all testimony becomes part of the public record. We ask that proceedings be orderly and that when you are testifying, you address your remarks to the board. If this hearing becomes lengthy, we may ask that testimony be focused on new facts or information not already presented. The order of proceedings for each application will be an oral report by staff summarizing the issues of the case and staff's recommendations, an opportunity for the applicant to speak, an opportunity for any other interested parties to speak for or against the application, an opportunity for final statements and arguments by the applicant and staff. The board will discuss the issues and evidence, state its findings, and vote on a motion. Motions are always made in the affirmative. All right. We'll be moving on to item EXC 21-0012, an application submitted by Elizabeth Holman requesting a special exception to allow an eating establishment use for a Peninsula Live-Work unit in a low-density, single-family residential zone with a planned development overlay, RS-5 OPD, at 1040 Martin Street. At this time, I will recuse myself.
The chair has a conflict of interest, which is why she's recusing herself.
At this time, I'd like to start the staff report.
Thank you.
We may open the public hearing.
I'll open the public hearing first.
Smart. Okay, for the actual staff report, I'm going to be taking off my mask just to make it as clear as possible for everyone. I tried to space this out so that I could do this just for the sake of, again, so that you could hear me clearly. So for the first order of business, it is EXC 21-0012, submitted by Elizabeth Holman, requesting a special exception to allow an eating establishment use for the Peninsula in a live-work unit, which is a low-density, single-family residential zone with a planned development overlay. And the use is at 1040 Martin Street. So for the subject property, it is located adjacent to Emma J. Harvett Square Park in the Peninsula neighborhood. I'll show the map in a minute. The Peninsula does have some unique regulations that aren't typically in most parts of the city. They are part of the planned development overlay that is there associated with the single-family zone. And it also has a regulating plan that shows what different kinds of buildings can be constructed where, and then how specific uses in those buildings can work together. It does have some areas for commercial development or potential commercial development with the goal of reducing car trips by providing goods and services for nearby residents. So for the subject property at 1040 Martin Street, it is a live-work site which does allow some commercial uses in the ground floor with residential uses above. It's not all commercial uses that are allowed by right, though. So, for example, eating establishments require a special exception. This unit actually did have a special exception in it in the past that was approved in 2016, EXC 16-quadruple 06, but it was discontinued for more than a year, and so they need to apply for a new special exception to allow the use again. In terms of the actual criteria that are part of this special exception, there are no specific approval criteria, so it will only cover general approval criteria that will be used to evaluate the proposal. So here you can see the subject property and an aerial of the Peninsula neighborhood. So the subject property is outlined in red, again, directly across from the park in the center of the Peninsula neighborhood. And that's the area that's designated for commercial uses in the peninsula. The zoning map shows that it's all pretty much low-density, single-family residential RS5 with that planned development overlay. And again, it's the overlay that brings in these special development regulations that affect uses. So even though it is a residential single-family zone, it does allow some commercial uses. And there's just a close-up of the unit. So it's the northmost unit in that line of buildings. Here is a picture of the building looking from the southeast. You can see the front building face and how it has commercial uses on the ground floor, residential above. It has some outdoor seating that's next to it along the sidewalk. This is looking southeast at neighboring properties where there are some townhomes, and then looking north from the property to some additional townhomes. And here you are looking northwest towards Emma Harvitt Square, in addition to seeing the outdoor seating. And then here's a picture of the site plan that was included in your packet. It is pretty much identical to the previous site plan that was used at the site, so they're largely keeping the interior of the space as it was for the previous restaurant, and there aren't a lot of changes that are happening with that. So tonight, the Board of Adjustment is charged with approving with conditions, or denying the application based on the facts presented. To approve the special exception, the board must find that it meets all applicable approval criteria. So in this case, it is the 7 general standards for all special exceptions that are being reviewed. And those are located at 14.4B3 of the city code. The first general criteria is that the specific proposed exception will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, comfort, or general welfare. So for the subject use, it is a relatively small use at about 766 square feet. And from the previous restaurant that was approved in the past, the intensity of the property will not change substantially. Similarly, the unit is already built out, so access to the property and surrounding properties won't be affected. And in the future, if it does want to expand in any way, it would require another special exception. Based on the size and its location in the neighborhood and some seating constraints that it has, staff believes that it will rely primarily on customers who are already within the neighborhood. So that could be either residents or people who are traveling through, whether to the dog park or along the bike trails that are in the neighborhood. The second proposed exception is that it will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity and will not substantially diminish or impair property values in the neighborhood. So, as I said, it was previously an eating establishment and it had minimal effects on neighboring residences, so staff doesn't anticipate any major issues. As far as other commercial uses in the area, staff has approved special exceptions with some conditions that limit the hours of operation, the size, and exterior sound. The purpose of those were to ensure that the neighborhood commercial area retains a mix of uses and that it does not negatively impact surrounding properties. So staff does recommend similar conditions for this use, but staff does not believe that size limitations are necessary, which are approved in some other ones, because if the use wants to expand, it will require another special exception. So as a result, the conditions that staff is looking to recommend then are limited to hours of operation, as I'll detail at the end, and then also preventing exterior amplified sound. And so that's really to prevent the negative externalities that can be associated with those. As far as signs and lighting, they have to comply with the regulations in the Peninsula Code and in the City Code, and they have to be approved by the Peninsula Neighborhood Architectural Review Board. So those would be reviewed subsequently. The third criteria is that the establishment of the proposed exception will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of the surrounding property for uses in the district. staff finds that the neighborhood is fully developed. It's got a mix of residential and commercial uses, and the Peninsula Regulating Plan does allow opportunities for commercial uses, specifically across from the park. And the building was already designed, built for commercial uses on the ground level, and so staff believes that this criteria is met. The fourth criteria is that adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, and/or necessary facilities have been or are being provided. So in this case, again, it's already developed. There are access roads already, on-site drainage. The area behind the property is reserved for stormwater detention, and staff doesn't believe that any additional facilities are required. The fifth criteria is that adequate measures have been or will be taken to provide ingress or egress designed to minimize traffic congestion on public streets. So in the Peninsula Development Regulations, off-street parking is not required for commercial uses that are less than 1,500 square feet. And there is no parking provided for the commercial use at the site as a result. Based on the location and the size, staff believes that the customers that are drawn will be limited. A lot of it, again, will be people who live in the neighborhood or who are already in the neighborhood for other purposes. And so staff believes that adequate ingress and egress are provided in this case. The sixth criteria is that it's set for the specific regulations and standards applicable. The specific proposed exception will conform with all other applicable regulations in the city code. So the use has already been built. Other aspects have been reviewed for compliance with the Peninsula standards, with the building code, those sorts of things. And any changes to those previously approved uses, such as lighting or signage, like I had already mentioned, will require appropriate permits and will be reviewed upon the application of those. So staff believes that this criteria is met. And then finally, the proposed exception will be consistent with the comprehensive plan of the city as amended. So for the Peninsula neighborhood, it was developed using conservation and traditional neighborhood design principles. Again, it includes a variety of housing types, it includes some neighborhood commercial and live-work buildings such as the subject property. And the Peninsula Regulating Plan does include those opportunities for limited commercial uses, such as where the building is currently located. So staff does believe that the comprehensive plan is being met. So as far as the staff recommendation then, staff recommends approval of EXC 21-0012 to allow an eating establishment in a Peninsula live-work unit for the property at 1040 Martin Street, subject to two conditions. First, that the business hours of operation must close by 10 p.m. on Sunday through Thursday and 11 p.m. on Friday through Saturday. And then second, that amplified sound on the exterior of the building is prohibited. And that concludes the staff presentation.
Are there any questions for staff from the board?
I'm just curious, so they can open whenever they want in the morning? There's no opening time?
Correct. We did not place an opening time limitation. Instead, we followed basically what the other uses in the peninsula have.
Is that standard practice, or it depends on each project?
It depends on the projects. There are some standards in city code that do place opening hour limitations as well. Often you see those, for example, with the rooftop service areas has opening limitations. Generally in this location with the proposed use, staff believes that closing limitations are probably more what staff would be concerned about with late hour of operations. I know that this will probably serve coffee, and so that might affect hours as well in the morning, but staff is not concerned about those at this time.
So there's no alcohol being served. If they want to serve alcohol, then they have to get a liquor permit?
They would have to get a liquor license, and it wouldn't technically convert from an eating establishment to a drinking establishment unless they were open past midnight. So that's when it starts to trigger drinking establishment regulations, which are slightly different. In this case, they're not proposing alcohol at this time. Same with outdoor service area. If they want alcohol outside, they would also need a different permit for that. That'd be another permit.
Kirk, question. On the PDF attachment for floor plans, what are the starbursts? Are those shrubs, trees, or the lighting plan? Because I see it's on the inside now. Okay, right there. Those are trees, I would assume?
Those are shrubs and trees. So you'll notice that the white part, the ones that are close to the building, that's actually outside of the building.
Yep, okay.
Yep.
Kurt, are the window openings, are they fixed, or does this have the potential to open up a wall of windows to allow sound to leave?
I believe that they are fixed as currently constructed. I mean, they could always apply to put in windows that would open up wider.
I'm just curious how the regulation about exterior amplified sound comes into play there.
Again, it wouldn't, because that would be interior sound. So really what the exterior amplified sound prevents is if they put a speaker outside to provide sound, or music, for example, for the seating area, that's where that would come into play.
Any other questions? Open the floor now to anyone who wants to speak in favor of the proposal. Anybody that wants to speak opposing the proposal? Any further clarification from the board needed? If not, at this time, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion.
I move to motion or approve EXE 21-0012. The applicant submitted by Elizabeth Homan requesting the special exception to allow eating establishment use for the Peninsula Live Work Unit in low-density single-family residential zone with a planned development overlay, RS-5/OPD at 1040 Martin Street.
Second? For anybody second?
I'll second.
Okay. All right, at this time, we'll have discussion of finding of fact.
And just confirming that the recommendation includes the two conditions put forward by staff or does not, just to make sure that one way or the other that's clear.
Bryce? It's up, it's up there.
So my motion for EXE 21-0012 would include the subject to the following conditions. I don't think that was written on this one. So the business hours of operation must close by 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday and 11 p.m. Friday through Saturday. Number 2, amplified sound on the exterior of the building is prohibited.
I second.
Now we'll have the finding of fact. If not any questions on the finding, on the facts, then we need a motion to accept them.
I so move. Or do I need to read this?
You need to read all of it.
Okay.
Or unless you want me to.
Regarding item EXC 21-0012, I concur with the findings set forth in the staff report of August, whatever it is. What is today?
11th.
The 11th. And conclude that the general and specific standards are satisfied. Unless amended by or opposed by another board member, I recommend that the board adopt the findings in the staff report for the approval of the special exception.
I agree.
I think she said,
Yeah,
Nancy did.
okay.
Is that how you're annotating?
Yep. Carlson, second. Russo, first.
Okay, well, then we'll go to the vote. Roll call?
Russo,
Aye.
Carlson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Pretorius absent, or not, Pretorius out in the hallway. Crescilis,
Yes. Motion carries. The motion is declared approved. Any person desiring to appeal this decision to a court of record may do so within 30 days after this decision is filed with the city clerk's office.
and Bryce, you should be able to see can you see the presentations on the screens at all up there? Yep. Okay. Yeah, I realized I didn't.
I can also plug in my iPhone from 2007 as well.
Maybe an iPod.
All right, moving on to the item B on the agenda, EXC 21-0009. This is an application submitted by Axiom Consultants requesting a special exception to allow a 50% parking reduction for other unique circumstances to construct a new mixed-use building at 21 South Lynn Street. The public hearing is now open, and we will hear from staff.
Thank you.
Hey, Kirk,
Yeah,
before you start, can I ask a question?
sure.
According to my reading of the letter from Mr. Miklo, are we even considering a valid exception? It seems that maybe staff was basing its findings on the wrong section of the code.
No, staff's citation was an old citation that was incorrect. It's still the same. The actual section itself with the unique circumstances is the correct citation that was applied for. I had just put the wrong number. It should read
Oh.
7 instead of 6.
Okay, well, some of the comments that he made it appear to me anyway that we were looking at things from the wrong perspective, or that the staff may have been applying the wrong portions of code to the findings of fact.
I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation as well.
Okay.
So EXC 21-0009, submitted by Axiom Consultants on behalf of CA Ventures to request a 50% parking reduction by special exception for unique circumstances for a new mixed-use building at 21 South Lynn Street. This one also does require a second special exception that's included in the staff report regarding parking on the first floor of the building. I will also go through those criteria as well.
You're voting on that tonight as well?
Yes, yep, it's all included. And it's included in the staff recommendation. So the subject property is 21 South Lynn, located right in the middle of downtown. It's the US Bank surface parking lot, and there's also a drive-through building on the site. You can see it in the location map attached, and that was in the staff report. Most of downtown is zoned central business, so that's CB10, including the surrounding buildings, except to the east, where it is a public building. That's the senior center. It is in the downtown historic district, which was recently approved. You'll notice that buildings to the north and east do have historic district overlays. The buildings to the west, the subject property, and buildings to the south do not. Building to the southwest does. But The historic district overlay provides, designates a local historic landmark. It provides protection to the buildings. Buildings without that are not protected by the zoning code. So regarding the two special exceptions, again, one is to reduce the minimum number of required parking spaces by 50% for the subject property due to unique circumstances of the use. So in this case, they refer to student housing as their unique use. The second criteria, or the second special exception, is to provide a proportion of required parking on the ground floor in a CB10 zone. So these two special exceptions would facilitate redevelopment of the site into a 13-story mixed-use building with commercial and amenity space on the first floor and about 229 residential units above. Note that this is going to the Board of Adjustment, not to Planning and Zoning Commission or to Council, because by right, they could build a building with the same envelope. So the exceptions that they're requesting is for the parking reduction and then also for that parking on the ground floor. In this case, again, I talk about it in my staff report, but the residential land use requires the minimum amount of parking, so that's where the parking reduction comes in. As for current uses on the site, like I had mentioned, there's a non-conforming parking lot and a drive-through bank. They're pretty old uses. These uses aren't typically allowed downtown anymore, so they've been around since about 1962.
About 1962?
1962. The subject property, like I mentioned, is CB10, so that is intended to be the high-density, compact, pedestrian-oriented shopping, office, and service and entertainment area in Iowa City. It allows really compact development with the goal of intensifying the density of usable commercial spaces, increase the availability of open spaces, plaza or pedestrian ways, and to support a healthy and vibrant commercial core. It does encourage mixed-use buildings with storefront commercial and residential above. There are two unique challenges to this property. So the building to the west is a building that is historic, but does not have a historic district overlay. There are windows on the second story there that could provide egress in the future. They don't currently for rental units, but blocking the windows could prohibit future rental permits. And then the second is that the First National Bank drive-through building on the property is actually a contributing resource to the Downtown National Historic District that was recently approved. Again, it's not a local historic landmark and it's not in a historic district overlay zone. As far as plans, the Downtown and Riverfront Crossings Master Plan shows the site as one of the few remaining sites for strategic infill. With regards to minimum parking standards, they are intended to provide off-street parking to accommodate most of the generated demand for parking, especially where sufficient on-street parking is not available. They're also intended to prevent non-residential parking from encroaching on nearby residential neighborhoods. The CB10 zones are unique in that they are actually subject to maximum parking standards as well for private off-street parking. So the goal is to preserve land for active uses and maintain a pedestrian-oriented streetscape. And part of that is because the downtown district tries to provide parking at a district-wide level. So it relies on consolidated off-street facilities, on-street parking and demand pricing to address parking rather than addressing it on a project-by-project or site-by-site basis. As far as uses that require parking, again, residential uses are the only land use category in CB10 that require a minimum amount of parking. So other uses don't have that, and they are the ones that are actually subject to the maximum parking standards. So as to the reduction requested, they are requesting a parking reduction of 50%. Which can be requested by special exception where a specific use has unique circumstances such that the number of spaces required is excessive. So based on the current minimum parking amounts, the proposed project would require 135 parking spaces, and so they are requesting a 50% reduction, which would mean that they would have to provide 67 on-site parking spaces. So the concept does include 67 spaces in 2 levels below ground and a few on the first story. Access to that parking would be from the alley north of the subject property, which exits onto either South Dubuque Street or South Lynn Street. As for pedestrian access, that would be directly at the corner of East Washington Street or South Lynn, and there are some doors directly into the retail space as well. So this is a picture of the subject property. You can see the surface lot, and you can see the drive-through banking facility to the east. Here's a close-up of that drive-through facility looking northwest. Here is a close-up of the adjacent historic building from the side of the site. It currently has a mural on the wall that is a temporary use there. Well, it's not developed yet. And then there are also the windows that you can see throughout the side of the building on that second story. This is that alley looking west, the alley that's north of the subject property with the drive-through bank on the left. And this is looking northwest at the back corner of the site. So as for the concepts that have been provided, this is looking, the one on the left is looking northwest from the corner. You can see that they incorporated the height of the abutting buildings into the design with that brick facade on the front. Storefronts are primarily along the street. You can see the dwelling units above as well. And at the northeast corner of the site, they are proposing a small mural wall. You can see that in the bottom right corner. And then you can also see that there are visual step backs from the north to the north and the west from this angle. So this is looking north towards the building, which is on the left, and looking west towards the building, which is on the right. So again, that left picture is from from East Washington Street, and the right picture is from South Lynn Street. Again, you can see that the building is a rough backwards C that is stepped back from the adjacent buildings, but the north leg does continue to be closer to the building, so it's just that south leg that is really stepped back from the buildings to the west. As far as the northeast corner, there is a cutout that provides that visual step back to the north that you can see from looking northwest at the site. And I'll also show it to you in the floor plan. It's easier to see from above than it is to describe from this angle, but I wanted to show you the concept first. And then this is looking to the south and then to the east on the left and right respectively. So you can see that on the north side of the building there, looking south, there's that parking entrance that would be on the alley, and you can see the adjacent building to the west outlined and how that is approximately the height of that brick facade wrap that is on the building. Here's the floor plan that was submitted with the application. So the first two on the left, or the left and the center, are the underground parking spaces that have the majority of the parking. The one on the right is that level 1 parking. So you can see that there are a few spaces there, but most of them are underground. The remainder of the facade is retail space, primarily on East Washington Street. There is a lobby, leasing, and amenity space along South Lynn Street. And then there's building facilities services in the northeast corner, which is where that mural is proposed. That would include generators, trash, that sort of thing. For the second and third and fourth levels, you can see that here with the second level to the left and the third and fourth levels on the right. So you can see that it is a backwards C shape. On the second story, they propose outdoor open space. And that C shape continues up for levels 3 and 4, which is where that brick facade is. And then as you get up to the fifth level is where you start to get the step backs and the cutout. So you can see that the south leg of that backwards C is where you get the setback or the step back where they have a terrace and they have some amenity space there. And that's also where you get the cutout in the northeast corner. And that continues for the remainder of the building. So tonight, the Board of Adjustment is charged with approving with conditions, or denying the application based on the facts presented. To approve the special exception, you have to find that it meets all applicable approval criteria. So there are two sets of specific standards, one pertaining to the parking reduction and one to the first floor parking. And then there are also the general standards that apply for all special exceptions. So the first specific set of standards is related to 14.5A.4.F.7. In the staff report, it read it as 6, which was the old citation. So 7 is the correct citation. but it states that where it can be demonstrated that a specific use has unique characteristics such that the number of parking or stacking spaces required is excessive, the Board of Adjustment may grant a special exception to reduce the number of required parking or stacking spaces by up to 50%. So regarding this, the applicant again requested the full 50% parking reduction due to the unique characteristic of the use. So their unique use that they are citing is that their building is for university students who prefer living in a walkable urban setting to having on-site parking. Staff finds that students generally exhibit lower demand for on-site parking. They are more likely to use alternative modes of transportation, such as walking, biking, and transit. The units do feature features that are specific to student populations, such as furnished units. They have on-site amenities. They're proposing a study lounge for some of those. That is not to say that it is restricted exclusively to students. Non-students may reside there, but it is marketed and intended for students is how it's built. As far as downtown residents, they do tend to use their cars less due to proximity to the university, jobs, and other services. So they provided some census data that is available in the staff report, but typical work commutes in census tracts near downtown show that 45% drive alone, 6% carpool, 39% walk or bike, 6% use public transportation, and others work from home or use other modes of transportation. The subject property is in Tract 21, and I'll show you where these tracts are again. Tract 21 is the most downtown, so that actually has the lowest levels of car usage, where only 27% drive alone to work. And 80% of the residents that are living in this area are enrolled in undergraduate or graduate programs. So that supports the claim that students exhibit a lower demand for on-site parking. So this shows the census tracts. This was included in your staff report. Again, 21 is the most central one downtown. That's where you can see on the star at East Washington and South Lynn is where the project is located. Tract 11 is the one to the north, would be roughly the north side, and then 16 is also widely considered downtown and occupied by students. Again, there's the breakdown for the different means of transportation to work here, but in Tract 21, 27% drove alone to work. If you account for all of these tracts, approximately 45% drive alone to work. So as for the proposed development, they are proposing 67 on-site parking spaces. So that would be 0.29 spaces per dwelling unit or 0.25 per bedroom. It does provide less parking than other recent student projects, so I'll go over those briefly as well. So the first is the Rise at 435 South Lynn Street. It provides approximately 0.6 parking spaces per dwelling unit or 0.34 per bedroom. Staff is not aware of any complaints regarding spillover parking on that. And then Gilbane, Iowa City, which is at 700 South Dubuque Street. So this has been approved for 0.81 spaces per unit and 0.41 per bedroom. It received a special exception. It used a similar rationale of student housing, but special exceptions do not set precedent. So we are only using this as an illustration of other student uses. It's not by any means saying that it requires, for example, approval. It still is in the permitting process, so it's not built yet, but that was the other comparable unit provided by the applicant. And then census data does support that student housing has some unique characteristics such that the required number of parking spaces may be excessive. And then the second criteria, the specific standards are related to section 14.5A 3D 5E, which is that where parking in a CB10 zone is located within the exterior walls of a building, such as on the first floor of this use, the following standards apply. So first, the proposed structured parking will not detract from or prevent ground floor storefront uses, and that storefront uses have to be a substantial portion of the ground level floor of the building, reserved for and built to accommodate those uses, and that parking is not allowed within 50 feet of the lot. So the concept does not show parking in that first 50 feet of building depth, but that will be confirmed during site plan review. Approximately 72% of the street-facing facade is intended for active non-residential uses. So that includes retail storefronts, office, lobby, and amenity space. We did ask the applicant as to whether those could accommodate future uses, and it sounds like they could accommodate future storefront uses. The remainder of the space is those support areas that I had mentioned previously, such as the trash, generators, stairwells, et cetera. Primarily, that's in the northeast corner. The second criteria is that vehicular access to parking must be from a rear alley or private lane, and that garage openings shall be built to the minimum width necessary for access. So vehicular access to the on-site parking is proposed from the rear alley. You can see, again, that first floor diagram here with the where that parking would come from primarily on South Lynn Street. The third is that any exterior walls of a parking facility that is not visible from a public or private street must appear to be a component of the facade of the building through the use of building materials, window openings, facade detailing that is similar or complementary to the design of the building. So the concept shows that most exterior walls to the parking facility will not be visible because to the east and south, they'll be behind the building facades that will meet those central business site development standards that are required. So those have window requirements. They have some other requirements that I discuss a little later in the staff report. And the garage wall to the west abuts the existing building. As to the building or the walls to the north, the alley would be visible from the alley, which is not considered a public street. And the wall of the parking facility is set back about 50 feet from the South Lynn Street right-of-way. So it does, staff believes that it does meet that standard. The final specific criteria is that each entrance and exit to the parking area must be constructed so that vehicles entering or leaving are clearly visible to a pedestrian on abutting sidewalks at a distance of at least 10 feet. Stop signs and appropriate pedestrian warning signs may be required. So the concept shows the entrance and exit is more than 50 feet from the nearest sidewalk, which is the one to the east. But staff does recommend a condition that the applicant provide a convex traffic safety mirror or similar method of providing visibility of or awareness of potential conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians who are using the alley. And then finally, it must meet the general standards located at 14.4B3, and there are 7 general standards that I will go through. So the first is that the specific proposed exception will not be detrimental to or endanger the public health, safety, comfort, or general welfare. So again, there are 67 on-site parking spaces proposed, about 0.29 per dwelling unit or 0.25 per bedroom. The ITE suggests that average parking demand for multifamily high-rise, multi-use urban has a parking demand of about 0.55 vehicles per unit or 0.3 per bedroom. Parking for recent high-rise residential projects in the CB10 zone also vary in their approach to parking pretty widely. So I included 3 in the staff report. So one is the Tailwinds project. That is not yet built, but that is a multifamily exclusive building with about 102 dwelling units or 186 bedrooms. So they are providing 50 on-site spaces, and they received a reduction for historic properties, EXC 20-07. Their final parking that they would be providing on site is about 0.49 per unit or 0.27 per bedroom. The Chauncey at 404 East College Street is a mixed-use building completed in 2017 that has 60 dwelling units, 76 bedrooms. They provide 45 on-site parking spaces, which would be about 0.75 per unit or 0.59 per bedroom. And those are located in the Chauncey Swan ramp. And then there's Park at 201 East Washington Street, which was constructed as a mixed-use building in 2012. So that has less dwelling units, 24 with 25 bedrooms. They don't have any parking on site, but they do have 14 off-site spaces with a special exception that approved those, EXC 12-03. So that comes out to a count of 0.58 per unit and 0.56 per bedroom. So there is pretty wide variability in what those look like and how they've been accommodated. So for the proposed project, it's per unit parking ratios are well below comparable projects. Its per bedroom ratios are more similar because it has a high number of one-bedroom units. And as for the Institute of Traffic Engineering estimates, those are not specific to students. That is all multifamily downtown. So students are more likely to use alternative modes of transportation than estimated by the ITE. So based on that, based on the, again, the different comparable uses, and based on the proposed uses, you can see what these parking ratios look like. Again, with 0.29 per unit and 0.25 per bedroom. It does appear, based on the census data for Tract 21, that those parking ratios are appropriate. And again, for Tract 21, that was that 27% drive alone to work. In addition, there are a couple public parking ramps within 2 block faces of the proposed building. That is not to say that this would accommodate the residential uses downtown. Some submitted correspondence also touches on this, that there are waiting lists for those. But Tower Place parking ramp has 510 spaces. There's 625 at the Dubuque Street ramp and 475 at the Chauncey Swan ramp. The idea is that that would provide parking spaces for visitors or for those visiting commercial uses downtown. Currently, the site is occupied by a private parking lot and drive-through bank. The concept does propose 6 new on-street parking spaces, which it would accommodate by reducing the parking entries to those to the parking lot and the bank. As far as spillover uses, most of the nearby streets are metered, and so it's not expected to impact on-street parking in neighboring residential areas. And tenants will have to consider reduced on-site parking in their decision-making, so it was likely that the project will attract tenants who require less on-site parking. Gene?
So to clarify, are downtown residents not allowed to obtain permits for parking in the ramps, or is it only if they are available?
So there is no availability for residents.
But are they allowed to at all?
I believe that they could apply for it, but I don't think that that would be anticipated to support residential uses.
So as far as the residential impact, you can't rely on anything from the
public
ramps, but visitors could park in there.
Yeah, visitors for those uses or for others visiting downtown. As I had mentioned earlier, there's also the First National Bank drive-in building that's on the property. So that is a contributing resource in the downtown National Historic District and would be demolished as part of the project. But adopted plans that the city has indicate that the site and the existing uses should be redeveloped. So the existing surface lot and drive-through uses aren't allowed downtown generally. They do detract from the vibrancy and pedestrian-friendly streets that are envisioned for the downtown. And so for those reasons, among others, the plans do show that this site is redeveloped. And so that is explicitly shown in the Downtown Riverfront Crossings Master Plan. And staff believes that that is in the city interest to redevelop the site. Staff does recommend that there be a condition that the historic nature of the site, including its current use and its use as the former city hall, which it was prior to being demolished for the parking lot, be acknowledged to the satisfaction of the neighborhood or the Director of Neighborhood and Development Services.
What is the definition of a contributing resource for the downtown National District?
So that would be a building that could potentially be listed by itself on the National Register.
Is it?
It is, well, it is as part of a district, but it is not an individually listed building, and it's not designated as a local historic landmark.
Okay.
The second criteria is that the proposed use will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity and will not substantially diminish or impair property values in the neighborhood. So the subject property and the surrounding properties are in that downtown district. That was just listed in May 27 of 2021. So 13 South Lynn Street to the north and 28 South Lynn Street to the east. That would be the Yacht Club building and the Senior Center building. Those are local historic landmarks with the Historic District overlay, as I had previously mentioned. The building to the west, to 220 and 222 East Washington Street, is a contributing structure, so similar to the drive-through bank building, but it does not have a historic district overlay. However, that is identified in city plans as a significant building for the city, whereas the drive-through bank is not. These are all occupied by a mix of different uses, some commercial, some residential, but they were largely constructed prior to minimum parking standards. The concept shows a brick facade matching the parapet height of the building to the west. The facade must meet the central business design standards, so I do talk about that a little bit in criteria 6, which talks about regulations for being compliant with other regulations in the code. So I'll talk about that a bit later. But it basically has requirements for windows, how the facade has to look, things like that. Entrances. As far as nearby residential properties that I discussed previously, again, they vary in their parking supply and scale, but there aren't really any single-family uses in the immediate vicinity of the proposed use. And most downtown residential uses do cater to the same market segment as the proposed project, or some of them also do cater to high-income households that prefer that urban living style. The concept does include 6 new on-street parking spaces, but the on-site parking would be reserved for those occupants of the building. Again, within about 2 block faces, there are approximately 1,600 public parking spaces and ramps, so that would provide off-street parking for customers and/or visitors. The proposed project will increase nearby pedestrian traffic, so that would likely improve the commercial viability of nearby businesses. And then as far as 220, 222 East Washington Street, as I previously mentioned, it's got second-story windows that could be used for egress directly next to the proposed building. So if the development is less than 5 feet from those windows, they wouldn't be able to be used for egress, so that would prevent it from obtaining a rental permit in the future. The concept does indicate that the second story would be more than 5 feet from the abutting windows, which retains the possibility of egress, but staff does include a recommendation regarding that to ensure that egress is ensured.
Can I ask a question about that west wall? Because I don't quite understand where it's supposed to be. Is it going to be the same distance from the building to the west from the ground up? Or is there going to be
Sure. So the concept shows it a little differently, where it's, I believe, approximately 3 feet on the ground floor and 5 feet at the second floor. We leave it open as to, they can tweak their concept to either provide 5 feet the whole way across, or they could cantilever something out to allow access to those windows. So in staff's condition, we do allow a couple different ways of accommodating it. Really what staff wants to ensure is that to avoid damaging surrounding properties, that there be egress provided there for those windows.
So what does the fire code say about that?
The fire code is 5 feet for egress is how we've done it in the past for those units.
But it can be 3 feet for the first story where there's no egress, and then go to 5 feet.
As long as there is a way out for those residents that's 5 feet across, yes.
So is that wall on the building to the west, is that a firewall?
It is an exterior wall.
It's an exterior wall, so would it qualify as a fire? I mean, if they intrude on that 5-foot space, they probably raise the requirements, right?
Potentially. I'm not exactly sure about that. What we were more concerned about was the egress to those windows rather than, I mean, it will have to be approved according to the fire code and the building codes. So a lot of those things get caught at that point in time. But as to how they would specifically address egress, that's what staff's primary concern was with that. And the wall does step back a little bit. If you look at it, it's not a flat wall, it steps back. So there is even a possibility where it just has to be 5 feet from that building face, where it could be 3 feet, and maybe it does meet that. But that would be the applicant would have to show that in their site plan review. The third criteria is that the specific proposed exception will not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement of surrounding properties for uses permitted in the district. The downtown district is obviously already developed predominantly. There are a few additional sites that the city has identified that are appropriate for redevelopment. That's mostly because a lot of the downtown is historic, and so the city doesn't want to see or wants to preserve those historic buildings. As far as those specific sites being slated for redevelopment or identified for potential redevelopment, they wouldn't be impacted by the proposed project. Again, the one that would be most impacted would be the abutting property that is not part of the project, so East Washington Street. That is a historic structure, which the downtown master plan shows that it should be preserved, and so redevelopment is not expected and should not occur at that site. So based on those findings, staff doesn't believe that the normal and orderly improvement of nearby uses will be impacted by either the proposed development or the parking reduction or the parking on the first story. There may be some temporary closures due to construction in the public streets, but again, those are temporary rather than permanent impacts on those buildings. The fourth criteria is that adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, and/or necessary facilities have been or are being provided. So there are existing streets and the existing alley, which provides adequate vehicular and pedestrian access. And the site has excellent access to public transportation. So there are several bus lines that run on East Washington Street right against the project. As far as utilities, drainage, other necessary facilities, those will be evaluated more thoroughly during site plan review and the building permit processes. So similar to things like fire code, all of those things would have to be okay with the city at that point in time. As far as ingress or egress on public streets, adequate measures have to be taken. So the parking entrance is at grade on the alley to the north. We would expect vehicular access to primarily be on South Lynn Street, but they may exit west towards South Dubuque Street. And some existing vehicle access points will be eliminated, which would prevent some vehicular conflicts and would focus them at those alley points. Again, new public parking will be constructed in the East Washington Street and South Lynn Street rights-of-way, so that would help support some demand for short-term on-street parking for nearby commercial uses. And then pedestrian access would be along the sidewalks that are by the building, and the street improvements would also facilitate that continued pedestrian use. And then again, there's good access to transit. City routes 1, 2, 4, and 9 all run next to the subject property. The sixth criteria is that other than the specific regulations and standards being considered, that it in all other respects conforms with the applicable regulations for the zone in which it is located. So staff in the staff report looked at the dimensional requirements that are provided and then also the central business site development standards that are provided in the code for CB10 zones. First, for dimensional requirements, these are the standard ones that you would look at off the bat. So there are no minimum lot or setback requirements. There is a maximum setback requirement of 12 feet, which the concept appears to be met. In the CB10 zone, this is where things are a little difficult to explain, but basically there's no maximum height limit in the CB10 zone. The way that height is regulated is based on the floor area ratio. So essentially what you're doing is you're saying, what is the lot area, and you multiply it by whatever the floor area ratio number is. So in a CB10 zone, that base level is 10. It actually can be increased with bonuses that are not being taken advantage of in this concept. So the proposed use is within that 10 floor area ratio. The other requirement is brought in by the Federal Aviation Administration. So they do have a 155-foot height limit in the zone. But as long as you're within that and you don't have the floor area that's too expansive, then you would meet those standards. The other standard that can be tricky is the open space requirement, but that is allowed to be met with both, up to 50% of it can be indoor space, and outdoor space can be included on second-story courtyard, or on courtyards on top of the building. So they have the second story and the fifth story areas. They have some indoor amenity space. They show that they well exceed that open space requirement of 2,700 square feet based on the number of bedrooms. They would need to make sure that they meet the design criteria for those. So that includes some improvements to ensure that they're used, usable outdoor space is really the goal of those standards. But those would all kind of be checked during the site plan review. And then for the central business site development standards, these are really ensuring that downtown development is compatible with pedestrian-friendly streetscapes, compatible with adjacent uses. So the concept does address standards related to commercial space, minimum windows, building articulation such as step backs, differences in facades, for example, for visual interest. And it meets standards related to building entrances and other similar requirements that are included in that. The project may require a minor adjustment or a minor modification. And this is due to requirements in the CB10 zone that the first 2 stories of the building actually be built to the side lot line. So this is somewhat complicated by this special exception, but essentially with this requirement, the building official may approve minor adjustments to accommodate irregular lot lines or structural requirements, such as installing footings or foundations that maintain the structural integrity of adjacent buildings. Really, the goal of this is to prevent unsafe, unkempt spaces between buildings. So if you have, for example, a very narrow alley, it's very easy for trash to get thrown back there, and that trash could remain back there without even an ability to clean it out. So it's things like that this criteria is developed for. Based on the concept, again, there is the step back for egress, and staff believes that is necessary because of the possibility of egress for that adjacent building and the requirement that you can't impair adjacent properties. So the minor modification would be necessary for egress at the second story property, but staff does recommend a condition that there be design features incorporated, whether that be gates, whether that be shielding, something to block off that space from trash, essentially, but incorporated to prevent those unsafe, unkept spaces between buildings. And staff would require that be approved prior to the certificate of occupancy. As far as other applicable standards, as I've mentioned, staff will review those at site plan review and at building permit processes. So that includes ensuring that they meet that FAA height requirement as well. And then finally, the proposed exception will be consistent with the comprehensive plan of the city as amended. So the comprehensive plan, future land use map shows this as a general commercial area. It does include a goal to maintain a strong and accessible downtown that is pedestrian-oriented with strong and distinctive cultural, commercial, and residential character. One of the objectives, is to preserve the historic Main Street character of downtown while encouraging appropriate infill development to enhance the economic viability and residential diversity of the area. And then the Downtown Riverfront Crossings Master Plan provides more specifics regarding this. So it shows this site as a strategic infill site. It's one of the remaining surface lots downtown and suggests that redevelopment may consist of a high-rise building that, at least at the base, occupies the full site. So as far as the concept that they show, it shows 1 floor of commercial space with 8 stories of residential above. It is a 9-story building shown in the plan. It doesn't include any on-site parking with that use, and it does include step backs from adjacent historic buildings.
I have a question about that about the residential and the commercial space. Mm-hmm. So when I look at the floor plan for the ground floor, they have amenities for the apartments upstairs. They have a rental office for the apartments upstairs. Is that still considered commercial? That seems to go with the residential rather than the commercial. And in actuality, I think there's only 5,000 square feet of retail space. And so I don't understand the concept of this. Usually in most of the other things, the first floor is commercial. And I looked at some of the buildings along Iowa today that have apartments above them. They have a small door with a hallway leading to go upstairs to the apartments above.
Sure. So, I mean, that would be a decision that the board would be able to make, but staff's interpretation of it is that, you know, if you put empty commercial space on the first floor, all of those uses would be allowed within that empty commercial space. And so even though it does cater specifically to the residential uses above, staff still identifies that as a commercial storefront space. But again, that would be up to the purview of the board to interpret.
Kirk?
Yeah.
Going back to that, the last point, so according to the comprehensive plan, what they envisioned was a 9-story building with a step down to a 4-story next to the historic properties adjacent to it. But this is a 13-story building, so
Sure.
the math doesn't match for me.
So staff has never interpreted the comprehensive plan literally as to stories or even the floor area ratios that are provided in the plan. The plan has some very detailed specifications that are tied more to market studies, but staff has not interpreted that literally in other examples.
And just a reminder to the board that the comprehensive plan is a plan. It's not city code. It's not adopted by ordinance. It's a vision. It's to provide general guidance to the development. So simply because something shows it's 9 stories does not mean that must be 9 stories. It's the guide, it's the vision. So just keep that in mind what the comp plan is.
But this standard says that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Right, but it doesn't have to be consistent with absolutely everything in the plan. Nothing is ever going to be consistent with absolutely every item in the plan. So you just have to decide whether it is consistent or not. That's your call. I just want to remind the board that the plan is a plan, it's a vision, it's to provide general guidance. And if looking at all of this, you conclude that it's not consistent, that's for you to decide.
And the plan does also incorporate some guidelines, some very specific guidelines as to how you might interpret consistency with the plan. So that's what staff looked at as it was evaluating the application. So first is that new development should not be located on sites that contain historic buildings. And I'll talk more about each of these in detail in a second. I'll just go through the criteria first. Second, that active uses such as ground floor retail, not blank walls, should front onto street frontages in the city plaza. That upper floors should contain office, commercial, and residential uses. That buildings should be built to the property line. Corner locations should be reserved for taller buildings, creating a block structure with taller buildings on the corners and lower scale historic buildings between them. That the taller buildings on the corners should have a lower base consistent with adjacent historic buildings to make them feel contextual with the rest of downtown while limiting the perceived height of the towers. And that parking should be located both on street and behind storefronts in parking structures. So with regard to these, I mean, again, the First National Bank Drive-In building is listed as a contributing property in the National Register of Historic Places. But as far as the uses that are on the site, the surface parking lot and the drive-through use, they are underutilized compared to other uses downtown and what is allowed by the zone. They promote auto usage. They don't support a vibrant pedestrian experience. And so the intent of the downtown Riverfront Crossings Master Plan was always to demolish that building and redevelop the site. As far as other standards, concept shows active uses on the ground floor, shows parking behind, it shows residential uses above, and the property is on the corner with the taller building. It does have a lower architectural base with step backs to reduce the perceived size of the building. That's part of the contextual piece of it. But based on the analysis that staff provided, staff believes that those criteria are met, but that is for the board to interpret as to whether the board believes that it is met. And it's up to the applicant to to make that case to the board. As far as other goals in the comprehensive plan, it does include some goals and objectives that support public art. So the redevelopment will cover the mural on the wall of the abutting building to the west. That mural was intended, again, as a temporary use until the site redeveloped. So the mural will be lost. We did get some comments on that in discussions, but the building does include a mural wall to help somewhat mitigate that loss. And then the downtown master plan also notes that the city addresses parking demand through a parking district approach rather than a project-by-project or site-by-site approach. And the reason that it does that is to achieve the desired level of development downtown based in that plan. Again, the master plan also encourages pedestrian-friendly development that builds on the strengths of downtown. So that includes proximity to the university as for student uses. And then reducing parking. As a result, staff does believe that reducing parking to promote the redevelopment of the subject property and also providing that parking on the first story is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Could you go back to 6 for just a second?
Go back to that criteria. When you say 6,
The one just before this one.
this one.
No, there was you were talking about the lower architectural base.
Oh,
with-
you want the concept?
Yeah, I want that concept. I want to write that down.
Okay. The lower architectural base is this criteria right here. And if you would like, I could provide you the
While
packet.
also limiting the perceived heights of towers.
Yeah, those are also listed specifically in the staff report if you have a copy of that with you. And let me know once you're.
Okay.
So based on the findings that are in the staff report, this presentation, or summarized in this presentation, staff does recommend approval of EXC 21-0009 to reduce the minimum parking requirements by 50% and to allow parking within the exterior walls of a building in a CB10 zone for the property at 21 South Lynn Street, subject to 5 conditions. So first is substantial compliance with the site plan that was submitted, dated July 30th. Second is that the historic nature of the site, including it being the site of the former City Hall, among other uses, shall be acknowledged to the approval, to be approved by the Director of Neighborhood and Development Services prior to certificate of occupancy. Third, that there be a clearance of at least 5 feet from the face of the existing wall where existing windows are located that may provide egress to the face of the proposed building. It could be at ground or above grade, as long as emergency egress is provided to the satisfaction of the building official. It would also require a perpetual emergency escape easement that would provide for future egress should that be occupied, and that would need to be approved prior to issuance of certificate of occupancy. Fourth would be incorporation of appropriate design features to prevent unsafe, unkempt spaces in the setback between the subject property and the property to the west, to be approved by the building official prior to issuance of a building permit and constructed prior to, again, issuance of a certificate of occupancy. And then finally, a convex traffic safety mirror or similar method of providing visibility or awareness of potential conflicts between pedestrians and vehicles at the alley to be installed prior to a certificate of occupancy. Now, staff did receive, fielded a few inquiries over the phone and then several written inquiries. So 3 of them were included in the packet. 4 of them I forwarded to you prior to the meeting. You'll also find them in front of you. I will summarize some of those discussions that were provided, some of the feedback, and some of them may be present tonight to share as well. But I just wanted to go through those as well as part of my presentation for your consideration. So first, one was from a Hockett that noted that the concept seemed tall and asked if the city had considered purchasing the lot as public open space. That was in your packet. Second, a Whitesell noted that the proposal would be problematic if it demolished 222 East Washington Street, and also said that the loss of the recently listed drive-through building is regrettable, but it's not a locally designated landmark. A Cubby noted that the current parking lot and drive-through are not the highest and best use of the property, and she appreciates the incorporation of step backs and cutouts into the building design. And then the late submittals that were provided, a bird on Iowa City Downtown District letterhead noted support for the request because it tries to fit into the downtown. The furnished units will likely draw students who will require less parking. Providing on-site parking is not possible, and the property should be redeveloped despite the drive-through bank. A Kading noted that parking should not be reduced because it's already limited downtown, including in nearby ramps. He also noted that the alley may be problematic as 2 businesses currently use it. It doesn't have snow removal, and there are dumpsters that might affect navigation through the alleyway. And so he noted that he doesn't believe the project meets general criteria 1 and 2. And then a Clark noted that parking should not be reduced because it would cause congestion downtown, that downtown Iowa City needs more parking, that the parking will drive businesses out of downtown as a result, and that the unique circumstance clause is intended for smaller projects. And then we had a Miklo who noted that the application should use a fee in lieu instead. And I believe that was the confusion, is that the citation that I had initially used was for fee in lieu, but that was not the criteria that we were evaluating it by. But that would require a code amendment because the fee in lieu requires or doesn't allow demolition of a historic building. He also noted that the code section was not intended for student housing for that unique circumstances, that the proposed use does not meet the step backs shown in the comprehensive plan, and that a smaller development should be considered instead, and then that student housing is planned for other areas of the Riverfront Crossings District. And he did include the image that is in the comprehensive plan, so I can share that as well. I did not include it in my presentation, but I think it would be good to show. So here is the pages of the downtown master plan. The image that he provided is right here. So this is in the center, the strategic infill on Lynn Street. The infill site on the right shows what is actually shown in the plan. That being said, within the plan, so you'll see that there are significant step backs to the north and to the west, that it is approximately 9 stories. But within the plan itself, there are also inconsistencies between that and the proposed uses that are stated. So when it talks about square footage, they don't quite line up. And so that's, again, where the plan generally is provided as a guiding document. And it's up to the board to determine what they believe consistency with the plan is. But that's where that comes in. Bob Miklo was the former senior planner who was here when the code was initially created. And with that, does anyone have any questions? That concludes my presentation.
What are the setbacks on the current proposed building?
I believe it is 20 feet to the west, and the cutout in the northeast, I believe, is 26 by 26 feet. But let me take a look at the site plan quick. So the step back to the west is approximately 20 feet and 6 inches, and the cutout is in the northeast corner. From the west property line is 26 feet, and from the north property line is approximately 32 feet, as shown in the concept.
What is it on the south side? The setback on
South is the street.
The south side is...
Washington Street?
There's not any significant step back on the south side of the...
Okay.
Okay, so there's no significant step back on the Washington side of this building?
Correct. It is from the west, and it's only in that bottom C part. So there is the back C that does go over to the property line. It's the half C building.
Can you,
Pull up the site
can you
plan.
show us that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're confusing the south and the west.
I was interested in this on Washington Street where it,
Yeah, so
where it
So
goes
you're
up
talking
brick
about
and
right
then
here.
How far back it goes?
there's not any major step back from the south side of the site. The step back is above the 5th story. This is the 20-foot step back. So again, this goes all the way to the property line, the north side of the C. And then that continues up the rest of the building. And then there's the cutout that is also in the northeast corner.
So let me understand this. So the cutout would be on the west side.
It's on the east side,
Or-
the northeast corner.
Okay, the one cutout, the courtyard thing would be on the west side.
Yes.
And so in actuality, that would not be visible from the street to any great amount. And it would not have an effect upon the look of the bulk of the building from Washington Street.
I'm not sure I follow the question.
Okay, well, one of the things, and the comprehensive code is a direction, but it talks about a lower architectural base with step backs to reduce the perceived height and bulk of the building. Okay, so how, when you say that there is no significant step back on the Washington Street side of the building, then that doesn't seem to coincide with the suggestion from the comprehensive plan, nor does it seem to be in keeping with some of the other high-rises that have been built downtown.
Sure. So there are step back requirements in the riverfront crossing zones. Those are not in the central business zone. So I think that that does provide some step backs that look a little different in the downtown than is proposed here. When staff was looking at step backs, we were interpreting it based on the image that I had showed from the plan that shows setbacks to the west and to the north. And so staff was concerned that there be some step back from the west and the north, and to help limit the perceived size of the building.
But as I said, from the west, well, you might be able to see it because the building next door to it is only 2 stories high. So when you look above that building, then you could see that the building on the corner of this development doesn't come all the way out, that there is, a hole in it.
I think the board needs to ask Kirk staff questions and let the presentation, and then have their conversation among themselves about issues they may or may not have at that time.
Okay, that's fine.
And if you have more questions, you can always ask me later as well.
All right. At this time, we will now hear from the applicant. Come up to the podium, sign in, and state your name.
Hi there, my name is Andrew Savoy with CA Ventures. With me today, I have Mohammed Ahmoud, who's also from CA Ventures, Tim First with Niles Bolton, who's our architect, and Mike Welch from Axiom Consultants, who's our civil engineer. And I did prepare a slideshow that I can kind of use to talk about a few points. Kirk did an excellent job, so I'm going to try to keep this very brief. So if you go to the next slide, I have an aerial of the site as it currently exists. You can see there are 6 curb cuts along the east side of the site and 1 to the south. So there are 7 total curb cuts. And that, in our opinion, greatly reduces the walkability around the site, because roughly every 10 feet, you have a space where a vehicle could actually drive over the sidewalk. And so our project eliminates all of those and increases walkability at the pedestrian level downtown, and we think that that is definitely a benefit. So if you'll proceed to the next slide, and Kirk already covered this, but we have our 2,500 square feet of retail along Washington Street, which we perceive to be the best street for retail. And then along Lynn, we have mostly active uses. They're not technically retail, but they're active. So they would be likely a fitness center for our residents and a leasing office. So it's going to be a fully staffed building. So these uses will have an active presence along the street. I understand that's not retail, but retail is not necessarily always active as a use. It could be a cell phone store if it was retail, and that would be not very active. So we think that these uses are actually more active than some uses you would get with certain retailers. And then along the northeast corner of the site, that's where we have our utility area. So this area must flank one of the property lines along one of the main streets because we have to connect in with utilities from the street. So in that area, we have more of an opaque wall, but we're proposing that that be a mural wall that could be designed and developed maybe in conjunction with a downtown arts group to kind of mitigate that loss of the mural that's currently on the adjacent property. Another thing I'll note that wasn't in Kirk's presentation is that we've done some due diligence investigation of the site, including borings. And as we did our borings, we encountered the water table at 30 feet below the surface of the site. So providing additional underground parking is very much infeasible because of that. And providing parking above the first floor, we think would greatly detract from the charm and character of the area. And so that's what we were thinking as far as that. I will also note that, as Kirk mentioned, a few of the other projects that have been approved for similar reductions, those projects actually have a higher quantity of 3-bedroom units and 4-bedroom units in some cases. And the code required parking for those units is much higher per bed. So the actual percentage reduction that we're requesting is actually very similar and in line with the other projects that have been approved. Understand that that does not set a precedent just because a previous project has been approved. If you'll go to the renderings and just down to the 3D portion. And so we've designed our building to be to acknowledge the adjacent historic character of the downtown neighborhood. And so as I was hearing discussion about that not being perceived from the street, so this is a view of the building from the corner where you can see that we've set back from the west and from the north to make the tower a separate architectural element than the base. So you have this elegant, thinner tower rather than the thicker one that we were proposing prior. And you have this base that kind of relates to the historic architectural language of the surroundings. And so I would note that in the comprehensive plan, it does not show a setback from the south. And that's what we were also looking at as staff brought that up to us. And so that's how we arrived on this general massing. And so I would also just, I guess, finish with the fact that so we'll be providing additional walkability, much greater than what currently exists at the site. Additional retail and active uses around the perimeter at the pedestrian level. 6 additional street parking spaces that would be for the public and are not included in our parking numbers. And an opportunity for public art, 270 residents that would patronize local businesses around the area, and likely additional taxes to support the downtown infrastructure once this is completed. And so we're excited to proceed with this development, and thank you for your consideration.
Does the board have any questions for the applicant?
Is there an area in the building that you've set aside for scooter and bike parking, bicycle parking?
There is. And if we go to the first floor plan, it's actually kind of in the center of the first floor plan,
Oh, okay.
that gray box there.
Oh, okay.
So that's bike parking.
And that would be for scooters as well?
So there are 2 parking spaces as you enter the building. There are 2 parking spaces that could be either 2 full spaces or 6 scooter spaces, depending on the need.
Those only provision for 6 scooter spaces in this plan?
Only up to 10% are allowed per code. So that would be 6 for us.
Okay.
I have a question. You said you were going to have 3 parking spaces on the first level.
That's correct.
So exactly where are they? Would the cars go straight in, and then would they have to back out into the alleyway?
So there's one space in which that would be the case. It's labeled the manager space on this plan. And as you can see, there's the alley where you would pull directly into that manager space. We are considering the idea of incorporating a shared zip car kind of concept in which the students would be able to rent out a shared car that would be in that space. And then there are two spaces as you enter the ramp, after you enter the overhead door and enter the property, where you could take a left and actually park in either of those two spaces, and we're considering those as the potential scooter spaces.
Could you point that out? I'm sorry, on the map. Oh, it's where it says scooters
Manager, there's
parking?
the scooter parking. But for scooter spaces, even though it would be 6 spaces, it still counts as 2 because you can convert 2 parking spaces to 6 spaces.
Okay, so in those two instances, if there was a car parked in there, they could turn around and leave the building going forward.
In the situation in which, in the two spaces that are labeled scooter spaces, they would be able to back up and leave the building going forward. In the
But-
spaces, in the space labeled manager space, they would have to back up into the alley.
And so were you had said in your plan that these were going to be used possibly for the people who work or are involved in the store, in the retail thing, rather than the apartments up above?
That is true depending on the retailer that is involved and how many spaces they need. We may sanction off a certain number of our spaces within the building for them, depending on what they need.
Okay, but if those are used, you were asking for a 50% reduction of parking spaces for your residential area, which goes down to 64 or 67.
That's correct.
64?
67.
67.
67 divided by 2.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so in actuality, although this is not much, and this is getting pretty nitty-gritty, but if those 3 spaces are included in your 50% reduction, then you're going to be a tad bit over 50%.
That's correct. I don't believe that any spaces are required for the retail, though. Is that correct, Kirk?
Spaces are not required for commercial uses.
No, they're not, and you had talked about making them available, which is a nice token gesture for the retail space. But when you're talking about a 50% reduction of parking spaces, and then 3 of the spaces are not going to be used for the residential area, then in actuality, instead of 25%, it'd be like 24.9. But the idea is that
We have not settled on any number of parking spaces for the retail at this point. So it's impossible to say what that number is or would be. Happy to take a condition to make it 0 if that's a turning point for you. But, yeah.
How many staff members will you employ?
Can you make sure that you speak into a mic, please?
Oh, okay.
Just for the sake of the
Sorry.
recording.
How many staff members do you think you'll employ?
There'll likely be between 6 and 8 staff members.
And so where will they park? Will they park off-site?
We have one space labeled manager space. We were thinking that one of the managers would park
I see.
on-site. The rest would park off-site. We do have other community assistants that would be residents in the building, and so they would either park in the building if they choose to rent a space, or park off-site if they choose to store their car in one of the university lots.
So these parking spots will be, they're not first come, first served, they're actually leased, is that it?
That is correct.
I see, okay, all right.
So I don't know if this is feasible or legal, but is there any cap on the number of occupants per unit?
At this point, we are not proposing double occupancy beds, which is when you have 2 beds per bedroom. So right now, it's only one bed per bedroom. So we have 270 residents in 229 units because we have 41 two-bedroom units, and all the rest are one resident per unit.
So you're saying you only allow one bed per bedroom,
That's correct.
which would somewhat limit the number of occupants?
Yes, at this point and going forward, there would only be 270 residents max, and our average occupancy is around 95%, so that's
Yeah.
around 255 expected residents.
Okay, thanks.
Does the board have any other questions for the applicant at this time? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak in favor of the applicant?
Evening, my name is Karen Cubby, and I co-own Beatology Iowa, which is at 220 and 222 East Washington Street. I'm really happy those buildings are going to stay standing. I was trying to figure out how I was going to save the buildings and save my business at the same time. So I'm glad I only have one of those things I need to do. So I do have a question about the appearance of a setback on the Washington Street and Lynn Street facades. So I don't know if we can bring that picture back. And maybe it's just a visual thing because it's a change from brick to whatever the facade is. But it appears to, it may not be very much, maybe it's 10 inches, I don't know what it is, but I guess that would be a question I would have is what is that setback from the outside of the facade to the tower? Because it appears there's a small setback. It may not be as much as on the west side, definitely, but there's an appearance of setback. And that's the kind of thing that's really important to me, as I have not been in favor of some of these larger projects in downtown Iowa City in the past. It's because they haven't understood the context in which these buildings will be placed. And that's part of my support for this project, is that it does understand the context of downtown Iowa City. This not only is the use unique in terms of the criteria you need to look at, but for me, this lot is really unique. I have always had this idea that this parking lot is just not the best use of space in downtown Iowa City, and that even though it would negatively impact my business to have this lot under construction for 24 months, for the activity of downtown and for the activity on Washington Street, currently with all the storefronts, it's really Discerning Eye and Beatology Iowa that have any ins and outs. And so the foot traffic on that side of the street and the ability to be successful as a retailer there is harder than on the other side of Washington Street. And with one more retail space, it just creates a lot much more foot traffic and in and out that makes any retailer that are in those three spaces more successful. And I guess I just wanted to say out loud, too, for the public record, even though I said it in my letter in support of this project, that I am currently needing to leave 220 and 222 East Washington Street because of a new landlord and circumstances that just aren't tenable for me to remain. And so I'm moving, and I'm not sure that I can really move again in 2 years into this property, but I am going to keep in contact with CA Ventures about that, because Washington Street's a great place for us. It's been our home for 15 years. We are a 35-year heritage business, family-owned in downtown Iowa City. And I just think it's important for people to know that I do have that interest in seeing this project go, but I have greater community interest to make sure it's a good one for downtown. So my personal interests are not always the most important for me, because I am going to land somewhere else, and I may or may not move back to Washington Street. But this lot is unique because it's on the corner, because it's kind of small, and I think that no matter what development is proposed here, it's going to need a special exception for parking, whether it's an 8-story building or a 13-story building, because of the water table issues. And one thing I want to note about the reason that the drive-through buildings are part of that historic record is because when we looked at doing the application for Historic District Downtown, we wanted the Ped Mall to be included, which meant it had to be the 70s, had to be at least things are 50 years old. So compared to 220, 222, and 218, which are 1883 buildings. So the historic asset is much different with those buildings than it is for the drive-through buildings, which I think if those are maintained, that this lot will never be developed, and it will remain a surface parking lot that's grandparented in and not the highest and best use of downtown property. I think those are all the things that I wanted to say above and beyond what I wrote in my statement. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have, but would love to hear the answer to the question about what is that setback from the outer wall of the brick facade to the tower, if that information is available. Thank you.
Thank you. Kirk, do we have that information?
The architect probably does, right?
The architect probably does. Staff's interpretation on it is it's minimal enough where it's a negligible step back on the south and on the east side as well for that tower. If you look at the rendering or the concept that was provided, I don't know if the architect has an actual detail as to how far back that was. The chair.
Please.
So there are, Tim, I'm not sure if you know what the wall section differential is between a brick wall and a panel wall. It's typically only 4 inches. 4 to 6 inches. But there are places in the facade that are stepped back by 30 inches, was that? Or
Yeah.
was it 20? 18 inches. So there are, if you look at the roof line, you can kind of tell there are 2 areas that are stepped back in that way to provide that relief. And 1 area along Washington that is stepped back in that way. And the elevator shaft, as you can see, there's an elevator overrun that you can barely see. It's about 5 feet taller than the rest of the building. That's actually set back that 18 inches as well to provide that depth of the facade that Ms. Cubby was asking about.
Thank you. Any other members of the public that wish to speak in favor of the applicant?
Maggie Elliott, I have a question more than, and I'm in favor of, but does the Board of Adjustment have the power to condition their approval? For instance, could you say that you require the design to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission to ensure it's consistent with the existing fabric of downtown? So that's just my question.
Sue, I think that's directed to you.
You have to tie it to one of the standards.
The answer would be if we can tie it to a standard. Any other members of the public wishing to speak in favor of the applicant? Are there any members of the public who wish to speak against the application tonight? Does the applicant wish to respond to any comments that you heard from the public? All right. Board, any additional comments for staff at this time?
I have some more questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, I want to know about the alleyway, because these cars are coming out on the alleyway, and specifically, I want to know the impact of this traffic on Studio 13 or whatever it is, the bar that has an entrance on the alleyway that will be almost directly across from where people go in and out of this building.
Sure. So staff's consideration of traffic impacts on the alleyway, if you're looking at peak hours versus the uses of businesses that are on the alley, probably aren't going to line up completely, in staff's opinion. I mean, there will be congestion in the alleyway, but alleys are primarily intended for, for the use of different vehicles rather than pedestrian access typically. So that was staff's consideration. As far as getting out from the alley into the street, I mean, they're going to have to yield to traffic and abide by the rules of the road and right-of-way.
I'm just concerned about pedestrians exiting that bar and the traffic that, that might be involved there.
Do you have any more questions for me as, those sound, again, like
Okay,
things for
those are-
the discussion, yeah.
Okay, those are for
Yep.
the discussion.
But if you have more things that you
Okay,
want technical questions on.
What is the city's responsibility as far as alleyways go and making them safe?
It depends on the alley. When you're referring to safety, what specifically are you referring to? Ice removal, that sort of thing?
Ice removal, pedestrian versus vehicle traffic on it?
So it depends on the alley. I believe that the city does not clear ice in downtown alleys, though. Yeah,
So the building will have on-site staff and management, including an engineer, and we typically do perform snow removal around the boundaries of our buildings, and that would include that leg of the alley as well to allow for easy access to our parking.
One of my concerns was, okay, you said one of the cars would back out into the alleyway. So in the street thing, it's supposed to be 10 feet, that the pedestrian can have 10 feet to see the vehicle. But I don't know if that's possible in this situation, and so how do you deal with this type of situation? You had talked about putting in a convex mirror to help see if there's any traffic going on, but I'm concerned about people exiting that bar.
sure. And so staff's concern regarding the convex mirror is more where the alley exits by the sidewalk, which is where the majority of pedestrian traffic would go. So as far as use of the alley by pedestrians, I mean, you can have backup parking in alleys, and this one has more pedestrians that use it than others due to the presence of the businesses. But, alleys can be used by cars as well. So that is, staff's opinion was that was not a concern. Or not a major concern, I guess.
But this is, I mean, the city allowed that bar to be put in there. They didn't just decide one night, hey, let's open up a bar here. They had to get approval from the city, and so I'm just wondering, Katie did write a letter about this, about his concern about the impact of this structure on his property across the alleyway.
Yeah, and that's something that the board can absolutely discuss,
Thank you.
Any other questions for clarity reasons for staff before we?
Kirk, Bob Miklo refers to payment in lieu of. How does that come into play here? And why does it not?
So there are multiple different routes, I guess you could say, that parking reductions can occur. Staff and the applicant did explore parking fee in lieu of, but because of the presence of the drive-through building, you can't demolish a historic or a property listed on the National Historic Register and use the fee in lieu parking.
But it is not listed. Isn't that what you discussed?
It is listed as part of a national district,
District.
and it is a contributing structure to the historic district. So staff did explore that. That did not appear to be a viable option, given the characteristics of the site. And so they applied through the unique circumstances provision rather than the fee in lieu because they couldn't use the fee in lieu of.
I see. So they're mutually exclusive. The plan is to remove that structure.
Yeah, they are two,
That exempts them immediately from the application of a parking, a fee in lieu of parking, is that?
they're two different routes to get to the same place, essentially.
Okay. And one other question. Mr. Miklo also refers to the fact that in many buildings downtown, there was a reduction in parking requirements. There was an existing reduction in parking requirements for many of the residential structures downtown. This is a step further. Is that correct?
When you mean a step further, could you clarify?
Well, in other words, the parking requirements for downtown structures, such as, I suppose, Chauncey or any of the other high-rises, is reduced from the get-go, right?
So what he's referring to is that when you're looking at the minimum required amount of parking, in zones that are typically used downtown, they have lower minimum standards. Then as you go farther from downtown, those minimum standards increase. So I think his interpretation was that because there are lower minimum standards that are already downtown, that this constitutes a further decrease. As staff evaluates it, though, we look at the code that currently exists, and that's how the code that currently exists and the criteria, and that's where we made our analysis.
Kirk, could staff remind the board what year the comprehensive plan was inducted?
I believe that both the downtown and the riverfront crossings, I believe, are 2013. Nope, downtown is 2011, it looks like. And it's been updated subsequently a couple times.
Thank you. If there are no other questions at this time from the board to staff, we can either close the public hearing unless I'm understanding anybody feels the need to defer. Okay. At this time, the public hearing is closed. Any discussion now? If not, we can also make a motion to approve it and then put it on the table for discussion.
Could we possibly take a quick break before we do this? Just a less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, bathroom break?
Yep.
Yep. All right. We'll resume in 5 minutes.
We might have to let you in if it's locked.
Oh.
Which it sounds like it might
Well,
have
the
been.
men's, I think, is actually open, but.
No, it's locked.
Is it?
How was it locked? Did it have one of these numbers on it? Otherwise,
I saw a key.
the back will work.
You're back for 3 weeks? Oh my gosh. I'm like, what? How are you gonna come to these meetings? You're assuming COVID's gonna be running rampant again and we'll be back to virtual.
Sue, can I ask you a question?
The Board of Adjustment has never done.
Not about this.
Right, that's true.
It's about your statement about the comprehensive plan. How is the
Why ever go back?
Exactly. Why ever go?
Okay.
It worked out well. I was comfortable in my house.
Yeah,
I was able to
quick commute.
use the restroom if I needed to without a motion to take a break.
Mute when I had a coughing spell, when I choked on my own spit, versus people think I had COVID now. I get it.
And usually when I did that, I just turned my video off, I just did my thing, came back.
Oh, my goodness, yes. You haven't heard anything.
Yes,
Maybe we should motion to resume Zoom meetings indefinitely, in perpetuity. I guess that'd be a city council thing. I think the governor allows it.
I'm thinking the governor's going to shut that down.
I don't know why. It actually works out better for the new generations.
Have you been just watering nonstop?
Well, yeah, I just can't afford to do it, and actually I looked at what it would cost to have a separate.
I think we should make a motion to buy new curtains, because these are
I vote for that.
gross from the 1970s. And you know what? I never see them open.
Just like the bank drive.
Where's the opening? Oh, they even.
Oh, goodness, yeah, I watered the other night, actually a tree in the right of way. I knew it.
So how is it? How's Germany? How's Europe?
COVID,
Yeah,
so you can't go anywhere.
Took down it.
that kind of sucks.
Natalie made me buy a.
I've been working with those elves for 20 or 30 years, I think the University of Illinois or.
Town car?
Oh yeah, it was a hardtop convertible. It was like
Oh
awesome.
my gosh, she made you get a different one?
Just
I still have it.
Okay.
So that's my daily driver, and then I have the bigger one.
Water that.
Nice.
Yes, I am, and it seems to be doing very well.
Oh, yeah.
It's 70 degrees back there. It's what, 90
No, that's true.
Motion to resume.
Motion to resume.
All right. Go ahead and resume at this time. So, as a reminder, we talked about discussion or a motion to put the item on the table for further discussion.
Motion.
Do we just do the discussion of finding of fact in our general discussion? If we believe that any of them have not been met?
Why don't you just put the item itself without any conditions or anything else, just on the floor to discuss and get a second, and then go ahead and
Okay.
discuss whatever it is you wish to discuss.
And then. Want to do it or is that?
I can do it. Okay, go ahead.
So I motion to approve E EXC 21-0009 to reduce the minimum parking requirement by 50% and allow parking within the exterior walls of the building in a CB10 zone for the property located at 21 South Lynn Street, subject to, well, I'll just stop there. For our conditions later on. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Discussion at this time?
Go ahead.
I will, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Just several things. I had a list of questions, and I just want to put out there. The primary one is, how did the building become 13 stories? In all due respect, it's always been my understanding that zoning has to be based on something, and it's based on the comprehensive plan, which is the accumulation and conglomeration of a lot of study and thought and forward thinking, et cetera. And if we can't base, if this is completely arbitrary, then I find this body at a complete loss on what to base our recommendations or judgments or whatever. So the comprehensive plan, or at least the downtown district plan, states that, their concern is that any new development tie in to the existing to the existing atmosphere and milieu, and they put that in writing and suggest 9 stories with, sort of separate, with a tower separated from the base. And now suddenly we have neither. We have 13 stories, and we really don't have any distinct step back.
But you don't need one in CB10 zone, so that's central business district.
But the Riverfront Crossings Comprehensive Plan made a drawing, and they recommend that it be based on, that anything
But
we
it's
do
a
be based.
plan, it's not code.
Well, what are we, that's true, that's true. It's not, I mean, apparently it's not law, and I get that. But their statement is that any variation from, I don't have the verbiage in front of me, but essentially any variation from that sort of jeopardizes.
Well, it still has to go through city council and planning and zoning.
I'm sorry.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. This is it. It doesn't go through council, it doesn't go through P and Z.
Okay.
This is it.
Okay.
So, again, these are just questions, and I'm not disputing at all the benefits of the structure, but I'd like to see it finessed a little more. And one of the ways to finesse it might be, we wouldn't have to go through this special exception if we conformed to, the recommended comprehensive plan requirement or a suggestion of 9 floors. I think 13 floors is a lot for that corner. That's just, The next question is, why the need? Again, we're in the premier real estate of Iowa City. Why do we need to offer incentives or discounts to developers? I'm not sure if this is in my purview or not. You could tell me if I'm completely off base here, but again, I think that's something that it just finds, it's a little troubling to me. Why give I asked that question already, why give the further reduction of the parking requirement if it's already reduced? Where will the excess parking occur? Because I don't know, but it'd be interesting to know, for instance, these large structures like Rise, if you go down South Lynn, I mean, there's not a parking spot available. That entire street, once you get essentially south of, I don't know what that cross street is near the,
Court?
yeah.
I don't think
There's no parking.
I don't think it's metered though. So I don't think it's metered.
No, it's not metered.
So you could just leave your car there. And who's to say that those are customers of Rise?
Well, my point is that where is this going to occur? Because we know that students have cars. I don't think, I mean, unless you're going to make it a condition of rental that, you don't have a car. Students have cars. They gotta go to Target. They got to go home. Again, these are just questions. But and then my last concern is, with this structure, with the introduction of 229 or 250 people downtown and all the requirements, et cetera, is the city making any kind of any allowance or increasing green space, for this increased density? That's all. So these are my questions.
I think just keep the board in mind that we're talking about the standards and whether any of these standards have or have not been met. So if there's a particular standard that you feel is problematic, I advise you to speak to that.
Okay.
So I'd like to speak to number 6, page 4, number 6, specific standards 14.5A, 4F, where it can be demonstrated that a specific use has unique characteristics such that the number of parking or stacking spaces required is excessive or reduce the ability to use or occupy a historic property in a manner that will preserve or protect the history, or if it has, anyway, when the Tailwind thing was done, they did get a 50% reduction. They have, let's see, Tailwind. Can't read it now. Oh, 20, and I broke this down because these units have different amounts of bedrooms. And to try and figure this out is beyond me and my math skills. So I went with beds. The Tailwind has 0.27 spaces per bedroom. That is the lowest one before we get to this one. But they got, part of the reason I believe they got that was because they were attempting to protect the facade of the buildings on the Ped Mall. So there was a distinct reason for dropping that. And I will go along with it. But now we're down to, what is it? This one is down to 0.25. So is our goal to see how far down we can go on the amount of beds per unit or per bed, or how many parking spaces per bed? When they did the parking thing back in the 90s, they took into consideration that these apartments or these units downtown would be inhabited by a wide variety of people, and that the parking would not cover everything, but it would cover a large amount. Now, these people, especially with the student things, are saying, no, we're a special group, and so therefore we should get special privileges. I'm sorry, but in doing that, are they negating our zoning law that was set up and was agreed upon by a number of people? And are we ending up being someone who is doing a type of spot zoning, or are we participating in an end run around our parking requirements? I just feel really uncomfortable constantly having to give a deduction in parking because someone comes and asks us for it, and say that this is a special group of people and they do not need all this parking. That's fine. If they want to do that, then they should. I would like to see it go before the City Council, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and have a discussion about this, rather than having this done on each time something comes up, it goes before us, and we're the ones who make the decision. I don't think that's what I signed up for when I got on this board. So that's one of my concerns. Is that, and the other thing is the people who ask for these major deductions in the Board of Adjustment, these are supposed to be special exceptions. That means it's not very often. And I would assume that that means that's tweaking a small little problem. This is the second one since I've been on the board that we have dealt with. And these are not little tweaks, these are big tweaks. And is that the purpose of this Board of Adjustment?
The purpose of the Board of Adjustment is to review the standards set forth by the City Council and determine whether the applicant has met them. That's your purview. You need to look at the standards, both the specific and the general, and to see whether the applicant has met them or not. That's your decision. That's your purview. That's your purpose.
Well, then I question whether this has unique characteristics. Number 6 has unique characteristics that the number of spaces required is excessive.
And just to clarify, that's number 7. That's where the staff report has that wrong number, the old citation. So it's 145A4F7.
Okay. It's on page 4
Yeah.
of mine, because I marked it.
Are you finished?
For now.
Oh, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm not opposed to redevelopment on this site, but I think I was, going over all this, I was having trouble consolidating my problems with it, but now I agree with Nancy about that standard, about uniqueness. I don't think this project establishes uniqueness. It's a residential building for students. I mean, that's not unique. And the other thing the other standard that I don't think is fully met is on page 7 of the staff report. The specific proposed exception will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity. I think it is injurious to the yacht club and to Studio 13, and I have a problem with that, the use of the alley for the main in and out to this building. I don't know how else they can do it, but to me, that's too much congestion in a inadequate space. So those two things are the main things. Like I said, I was having trouble consolidating my thoughts, but then we got this late letter from Robert Miklo, who obviously is more qualified than any of us on the board to analyze this problem or this consideration. And so I think that the things that he brings out are valid, the points he makes, and I think that we can use this as tweaks to this proposal. I think that, like I said, I'm not opposed to developing, having a residential building on this site. Something needs to go there, and this would, but I also think it's too big. I would suggest, as he does, that the city consider a code amendment to 145A4F6 to allow the redevelopment of properties containing National Register buildings, which would then allow them to tear down the bank building and also allow them to collect parking fees. Because I think if you're giving somebody an exemption from a requirement, they should pay for it. And the other thing is after this goes back to the city council, and if they decide that an amendment should be granted, then I would suggest, I don't think that the project as proposed meets, in my opinion, is in line with the comprehensive plan. I think that Mr. Miklo states 9 stories with a setback to 4 stories. I think that would be much more agreeable in terms of visual and density to the area. And so that would be my suggestion, is that we send this back to council to get that amendment, and then the developer comes back with a redesigned building that more closely is in line with the comprehensive plan.
Bryce, do you have any comments before I speak?
Oh, I think I've been shooting comments off, but I'm for the project. just from the stance that student housing would not use parking as dense as we are used to. As a member who actually bicycled here, I ask you, how did you get to this meeting? And if you live in the downtown area, and thus you used a car, yes, you are contributing to limit of parking. But those that of us that do not park, do not use those facilities, use public transportation to get around downtown, it is unique. And the standard, as told by staff, meets these standards, and I think we should go forth with the project.
I tend to agree that I do believe student housing is unique. And if student housing isn't unique, I ask the other board members to tell me what would be unique in their minds. We have only the information that's been given to us to go off of, and we've been given a U.S. Census Transit study that does in fact say that around 51% of people living in these areas do in fact travel by vehicle. I think in talking about the alley access, I think what our building goes here someday will be having to use that alley in some form. And we're talking about the building only having 67 parking spaces. If you imagine one vehicle exiting and entering the building each day, that's around 134 ins and outs. And that might take only a minute each time, and there's over 1,500 minutes in a day. So yes, it will be happening, but it'll be happening for a super minority of the minutes of the day, not only hours of the day. And the operation of the businesses, the yacht club and Studio 13, those hours of those establishments are very unique. They're very late, and I would say that specifically may not actually run into the hours that people may be coming in and out of this building from what I'm thinking in my mind. And we talked about the comprehensive plan from 2011. It's already had multiple revisions. And the reason it had multiple revisions is because things have changed since 2011, and ideas didn't make sense, or they don't make sense anymore. It could have been 2 years later. It could have been 6 months later. They thought, oh, this made sense in my head at the time. This sounded like a great idea, but it doesn't work actually when you try to implement it. And from working with Mr. Miklo historically, I've noticed knee-jerk reactions related to density specifically. And I understand this project, especially the development and maybe a consideration and even renderings of what they expected these properties to one day be developed to look like, something you could be tied very close to, and seeing that change could be disheartening to some degree. So there might be a little bit of an emotional attachment to that specific concern from that individual. So I also agree with Bryce. I think we do need to consider how things are changing. Vehicle, it's generation by generation. This is changing. Vehicles are becoming electric. They're becoming automated. Uber service completely changed the industry regarding different kinds of transit. Public transit is fantastic in our area, and I think we just always need to be considerate of where are things going, and all we have are the studies and the science, the information being provided to us as to what that actual information is versus what we have been used to in our lives historically. So, though I think very many valid concerns tonight by all board members.
Yeah, Amy, to your point, automation in vehicles, I mean, how many people are going to have a license in 10 years? I mean, this generation, the generation getting out of high school, my next door neighbor graduated high school, doesn't even have a license yet. So I don't think we're thinking about the next generation as we put this to a vote. I know historically there is a gap in our ages, but if we come together, if we vote on something that will contribute to the downtown Iowa City area and not the suburbs, I think we will make our city more livable. As staff said, more pedestrian friendly. We don't want to stare at a surface lot for another 25, 30 years, but that is not up for vote today. It's making our city more livable in the area that we have.
I honestly have the same feeling, too. I was originally taken back by the lesser amount of commercial space on the first floor, always hoping for more stores and businesses to visit when I come downtown. But then again, the last 2 years have taught me that brick and mortar stores are dangerous to some degree, and I wouldn't expect somebody who's getting ready to build a brand new building to build a bunch of commercial space and offices, as so many have recently shut down and are currently vacant downtown. So I love the idea that there is some space essentially reserved for some commercial space, and hopefully that is in fact what goes there. But again, even I have to set aside my own feelings as far as what I would like to see based on what has changed recently, and that is one of those items that has in fact changed.
Well, as I stated in my comments, I'm not opposed to redevelopment of this property, and I think it will happen, and I think it's a good idea, necessary. And residential use is, I'm not opposed to that, but I do think that the project, as it is now, is excessive, and I think that as a compromise, the board could consider my comments about sending this back to council for 2 reasons: to get another set of eyes on this, and also to see if they think that that code should be amended such that the bank building can be demolished with the application of parking fees. I don't think that this should be a freebie. And I also think that, as part of that compromise, that we should just ask the developer to come back with something closer to the comprehensive plan, because according to Mr. Miklo, whose opinion I would value it because he's experienced, would be that it would be sticking closer to the plan would be result in a better looking building on that corner.
Just to clarify, there's no compromise. The vote is either you.
I mean, compromise would be.
Is that a condition or something?
Compromise would be voting against it, I guess.
Right, okay, just to clarify, yes.
I too am not against seeing this site redeveloped. I mean, it has been a real eyesore in some ways for as long as I have been in Iowa City. It is not useful. It doesn't generate as much money as we could have if something else was there. Getting rid of all the curb cuts would be a wonderful addition. It would make walking and having a building there more conducive to walking. I am not against redevelopment. I want to see this redeveloped. It's just I don't believe that this particular structure right now works for that. And you
But
said,
Nancy, that's not what you're voting on. You're voting
No.
on whether staff has presented the material to fit.
I do not believe that they should have. What I am saying is that I would like to see this. I would like to see it redeveloped. But I do not believe that this building has enough unique characteristics to allow it to have the parking deduction that it's asking for.
So she's against that particular.
Yeah, you
That
want
part
to know
of
the
the-
standards.
that part of the
That's
standard.
my standard.
So that's what she's opposed to. The uniqueness aspect.
I guess. Sue, do we need to rattle off conditions, or are we?
I think before you do that, at least to me, there's 2, regardless of the conditions, that are no.
Okay.
and two that would be yes, probably with some conditions, I think. I don't see there's a point in talking about conditions unless Mr. Russo thinks all the standards have been met.
And then a second question is, going back to Jean's point, we can't set a condition to go back to city council, correct?
Correct.
That was just a,
Could they condition approval by city council? Or no?
No.
Okay.
that would be a result of voting against the proposal. I would hope.
Jean, you've been doing this a long time.
No.
No.
Sorry, the public hearing is closed.
So I guess it boils down to, Mark, do you think that such standards have been met?
No. No, I have reservations about the uniqueness of the site. And there is verbiage in there, and I can't point to it exactly, but there is verbiage that states that something about the historic value of the site. And I mean, other than, the fact that we're going to take out that drive-through, I don't, is there really a qualifying?
You lean in a little bit.
Is there really a qualifying historic value to the site that kicks in this, that kicks in this applicable code number? I don't know that. I would be much more comfortable with the project at closer to the suggestions found in the guidelines found in the comprehensive plan.
Oh, then? I don't know.
Yeah. What sounds like it.
Do they have to make a finding about what's not met, though, correct?
Well, I think they did.
We did.
Okay.
Yeah, the
perfect.
uniqueness, the
I wasn't
comp
sure if
plan.
that had to
I think
be
that
No.
goes the
The
majority.
discussion.
motioned or not.
Yep, just a roll call vote. Assuming that the board is ready to vote, I don't mean to.
Yeah.
I think we've made our statements.
I think we're
Okay.
done.
Carlson?
No.
Parker?
Yes.
Pretorius?
Yes.
Rushilis?
No.
Russo?
No.
All right, this motion is denied. Any person desiring to appeal this decision to a court of record may do so within 30 days after the decision is filed with the city clerk's office. Next up on the agenda, the consideration of meeting minutes from July 14th, 2021. A motion must be made to accept the minutes.
Also move?
And I don't think we need a second, just a vote is taken. All those in favor?
Do we do roll call
Aye.
or just say aye?
Nope, just an aye.
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 I wasn't here, so I'm not voting.
Recuse.
Next item, Board of Adjustments announcements.
Yeah, so I don't really think I have a lot of announcements. We are now in person. I just wanted to get a feel for you, Bryce, about
Cannot
when
make.
you're going to be able to attend, when you're not going to be able to attend, and then we'll need to talk with communications about what our options are for different things.
Okay. I am not able to attend in person. I
Starting
assume.
next meeting.
Yep. So I assume we can maybe request an accommodation,
Yeah, I will ask.
and then, but I guess I do have some time in November as well for vacation, so
I
I think I'm
wouldn't
in-
want to make you take vacation to come here.
No, I mean, they're like, yeah.
So I guess request hire and see what happens.
Okay.
But then I can make my recommendation or decision from there.
Sounds good. And then, obviously, we've had some issues with the online packet, so I will continue to try and email those, and hopefully that'll work better than our new online system is working. If we do still have trouble with my emails, I will probably try to use Dropbox at that point, which should allow larger transfers.
What's the largest PDF we can send? 10 megabyte?
I don't know. I've had things bounce back because people can't receive more than, someone I had emailed to once couldn't receive more than like 2K.
2K.
Or
That's not
two,
very much.
I'm not a computer science person here. All I know is I've had things bounce back, so we'll just keep playing that by ear.
And apologies for, I think I was emailing right at the beginning. I couldn't get on the city website, and actually, it downloads, it just doesn't open. It doesn't understand what file type it is.
Yeah, we'll keep working through that. I think that's it.
I just wanted to email my error code to you, though.
Okay, I'll absolutely forward it on to IT, and hopefully we can figure out what's wrong with it.
Would anybody like to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. I'm ready to go home and eat.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.